The Marines mocked her scars until the generals saw them and froze. Boot camp. They said the Marine Corps was no place for a woman like me. I heard it whispered in the barracks before I even put on the uniform, felt it in the way their eyes narrowed when I stepped into the mess hall for the first time. To them, I was already an outsider. To them, I was a mistake that somehow slipped through the system. What they didn't know, what they couldn't have known, was that I had lived through scars long before I earned the right to wear their boots. The ones etched into my skin weren't pretty, weren't hidden. They curved across my arms like rivers, burned into a desert, pale reminders of a fire that had taken more than flesh. The day I signed my name, I was already carrying battles they could never imagine. Boot camp smelled of sweat, sand, and gun oil. The air itself carried discipline, heavy and suffocating. We were drilled from dawn until nightfall, running until our legs shook, crawling through mud that seeped into every pore, shouting until our throats turned raw. For the men around me, it was a rite of passage. For me, it was an initiation into a world that wanted me gone. The first time one of them noticed my scars was during the obstacle course. The sleeves of my fatigues had rolled up as I climbed the rope wall, exposing the pale, twisted lines that wrapped around my forearm. When I landed on the other side, breathless and proud that I hadn't fallen, I caught the smirk of Corporal Davis. "Looks like somebody brought souvenirs," he said loud enough for the others to laugh. Souvenirs. That's what they thought my scars were. Something I had chosen, something I flaunted. They didn't ask how I got them. They didn't wonder if I had suffered. To them, scars meant weakness, a target to poke at when the nights were long and the drills unforgiving. I bit my tongue. In boot camp, silence was survival. If you reacted, you gave them fuel. If you ignored it, you starved them. At least that's what I told myself. But silence doesn't erase memory. Every laugh, every whisper about the burn girl etched deeper into the places my scars already lived. At night, when the lights went out and the barracks grew quiet except for the snores of exhausted men, I traced the lines on my skin with my fingertips. They were rough, uneven, like a map drawn by a trembling hand. And yet, they were mine. They told a story I wasn't ready to share, a story I wondered if anyone would ever deserve to hear. The drill instructors never mentioned my scars. They barked orders at me the same as the others, their voices sharp as blades. Move, drop, fire, crawl. To them, scars didn't matter, only performance did. And that was something I could control. So I ran harder. I pushed deeper. Every time Davis or the others mocked me, I used their laughter as fuel. While they whispered, I kept my eyes on the horizon. While they smirked, I tightened my fists and reminded myself, scars done to break people. Scars are proof that people didn't break. Still, there were nights when doubt pressed heavy on my chest. Would they ever see me as a Marine, or only as a girl with damaged skin? Would I ever belong here among them, or was I always going to be the shadow in their ranks, tolerated but never accepted? One night, Sergeant Miller found me outside the barracks. He was younger than most sergeants I'd met, his face not yet carved by years of service. He lit a cigarette, the orange glow illuminating the sharp planes of his jaw. "You think you're the only one with scars here?" he asked, his voice low. I froze. He blew smoke into the dark, not looking at me. "Some of us hide them under uniforms. Some of us hide them in our heads. Yours just happened to be visible. Don't give these idiots the satisfaction of thinking you're weaker for it." It was the closest thing to kindness I'd heard since I arrived. I never forgot it. Boot camp broke many of us, but it also built us into something harder. I watched men twice my size quit after the 4th week, their spirits crushed by the relentless grind. I watched others fake injuries just to escape the hell of endless drills, but me, I had already lived through fire. Compared to that, this was discipline, not destruction. By the end of training, I wasn't just surviving, I was enduring. And yet, the jokes about my scars didn't stop. In fact, they grew sharper. The Marines weren't prepared to see me thrive, and every time I did, it reminded them that their ridicule wasn't working. I learned then that sometimes people mock what they fear. Maybe they feared what my scars represented. Survival, resilience, the refusal to break. What they didn't know, what they couldn't yet understand, was that those scars were going to matter. Not just to me, not just to them, but to someone far above their rank, someone who would see in them what they had spent months trying to deny. That revelation was still far away, for now I was just a Marine in training, just another voice shouting in unison during drills, just another soldier running in the mud. But in the silence of night, I whispered a promise to myself. One day, these scars will silence every laugh. And when the general came, that promise began to unfold. The first wounds. The first deployment has a smell that never leaves you. It is the mixture of diesel, sweat, dust, and the iron tang of blood. No matter how many years pass, you carry it with you, tucked inside your lungs. When I close my eyes even now, I can still taste it. We were sent into the desert with rifles heavier than our courage and orders sharper than our instincts. I thought that boot camp had hardened me, but war has a way of testing you in ways no drill sergeant ever could. On the second day of patrol, we walked into an ambush. The sun was merciless above us, hammering our helmets with heat that blurred vision and softened thought. We should have noticed the silence. Birds vanish when trouble waits. Even the wind grows cautious. But we were young, full of the blind arrogance that comes with believing we are indestructible. The first blast threw me into the dirt. My ears rang as if 1,000 bells were screaming inside my skull. Sand filled my mouth, my nose, my eyes. I remember the taste of grit and blood mixed together. The world tilted sideways, but training took over. I crawled toward cover, firing blind, my heart pounding like a drum I could not silence. Around me, men shouted, cried out, cursed. Smoke clouded the horizon, and somewhere in that chaos I realized my arm was bleeding. It was not just bleeding, it was pouring. A piece of shrapnel had torn through my sleeve, reopening skin that already bore lines of survival. New blood joined old scars, a crimson river staining the pale roads that had already crossed my flesh. I pressed my hand against it, feeling the hot pulse, but I did not stop moving. Stopping meant dying, and I had promised myself long ago I would never let pain decide my fate again. We fought for what felt like hours, though later they told us it had been less than 30 minutes. 30 minutes of bullets, fire, and the sound of mortality breathing down our necks. When it was over, when the dust began to settle and the bodies were counted, I sat against a crumbling wall, staring at the blood on my arm. A medic came. His hands were rough, fast, efficient. He cleaned, stitched, bandaged. He did not look at me as if I were weak. To him, I was just another body to be kept alive. But the others noticed. Davis noticed. He smirked as I limped back to the transport vehicle. More souvenirs for the burn girl, he muttered, and laughter followed. Laughter in the middle of death. Laughter when some of our men were being flown back in black bags. It stung worse than the shrapnel. I wanted to scream, to strike him, to demand silence for the dead who could no longer defend themselves. But I swallowed it. Silence again became my armor. That night, under the cover of darkness, I unwrapped the bandage to clean the wound myself. The stitches pulled at my skin, tender and raw. I studied the new mark in the moonlight, another scar to join the others. Another reminder carved into flesh. I should have hated it, but as I stared, I realized something else. This was not just pain. This was survival inked onto me by the battlefield. This was proof that I had faced death and returned. Still, the men did not see it that way. To them, I was the girl with scars that multiplied like shadows. They whispered in the barracks. Some said I was cursed, that anyone near me would get hit. Others said I was too fragile, that the Corps had made a mistake letting me in. They called me Ghost Skin. They called me Ash. They called me everything except Marine. And yet when the next patrol came, I was there beside them. I carried my rifle. I walked their miles. I sweated under the same sun and bled into the same dirt. The scars on my body did not slow me, and deep down I think that angered them. It is easier to dismiss someone you can prove is weak. But when weakness refuses to arrive, when the person you mock keeps moving forward, your laughter begins to sound hollow. Weeks turned into months. Missions blurred together into a haze of checkpoints, firefights, and sleepless nights. My scars multiplied, some small, some deep, each one a memory, each one a voice etched into my skin that whispered, "You are still here." And every time the Marines laughed, I pressed deeper into the truth I carried. Scars are not shame. They are history. They are survival. One evening after a brutal raid, we sat in silence waiting for evac. The sky was painted with the last embers of sunset. I cleaned my rifle while the others joked to mask their fear. Davis leaned back against a wall, chewing on something, his eyes glinting with the cruel amusement he always saved for me. He pointed at the side of my face, where a graze had left a thin red line. "Careful, burn girl," he said. "Soon there won't be anything left that isn't scarred." The others chuckled. My jaw tightened. I wanted to answer, but before I could, Sergeant Miller's voice cut through the dusk. "Shut your damn mouths," he barked. His gaze landed on Davis with steel. "You think scars are funny? Every mark on her body says she fought when others would have quit. What do yours say, Davis?" Silence. Real silence, heavy and thick. For the first time, the laughter stopped. Miller looked at me then, not with pity, but with something harder. Respect. It was fleeting, gone as quickly as it appeared, but I clung to it. It told me I was not invisible. It told me someone saw beyond the surface. That night, as I lay on my cot staring at the ceiling, I realized something important. Scars did not need to be explained. They did not need to be defended. They simply were. Those who mocked them revealed more about themselves than about me. The truth would not stay buried forever. One day, someone with authority higher than Davis, higher than any of them, would see what these scars truly meant. And when that day came, silence would not be my only weapon. The next morning, during inspection, Sergeant Miller noticed the drawing. His jaw tightened, but he said nothing in front of the platoon. Later, when we were alone, he approached me. "You keep your head down," he said quietly. "You keep moving. Let the scars speak for themselves." His eyes held something unspoken, something like recognition. I nodded because there were no words to answer him with. Still, the days wore on heavy. The barracks' laughter became a rhythm, cruel but predictable. It tried to carve away at my spirit the way shrapnel carves skin. And yet, every time they mocked me, I felt something inside harden. Their cruelty became the fire that tempered steel. I began to see their laughter not as truth, but as fear. Fear disguised as jokes. Fear that one day their smooth skin might be broken too. Fear that they might not survive the way I had. One evening, Ramirez sat beside me as I cleaned my rifle. He spoke without looking at me. "They laugh because they don't understand. They laugh because they're scared." His voice was quiet, steady, carrying the weight of his own scars, though his were hidden somewhere deeper. I didn't answer, but for the first time, I felt less alone. The truth was that every Marine carried scars. Some were visible, some were buried. Mine just happened to shine in the open. And though they mocked me now, a time would come when those scars would demand silence. I could feel it waiting, like a storm gathering just beyond the horizon. And when that day came, I would no longer need words, blood, and sand. The desert does not forgive weakness. It does not care about ranks or flags or the names stitched above our hearts. Out there under the merciless sun, we were nothing more than flesh moving across sand, shadows crawling under skies that never ended. The heat pressed into our helmets until thought itself seemed to melt. The silence before a firefight was worse than the firefight itself. It was the stillness that felt like the desert holding its breath, waiting to decide who would live and who would not. We were sent on a mission that was supposed to be simple: secure a village, sweep the houses, confirm reports of enemy weapons hidden among civilians. Nothing in war is ever simple. The closer we got, the more the air felt heavy, as if the earth itself was warning us. Dogs barked in the distance, children disappeared behind doorways, and an old man with eyes too calm watched us march into the trap that everyone except us seemed to know was waiting. The first bullet cracked past my ear like a whip. Then the world erupted. Windows shattered, dust exploded upward, and the village turned into a storm of gunfire. I hit the ground, rolling behind a crumbling wall, rifle tight in my grip. My pulse hammered in my throat, but my training guided me. Squeeze, don't pull, breathe, aim small, miss small. Marines shouted all around me, voices sharp with panic. Some were hit, some cried for medics, some screamed orders that vanished in the roar of fire. I crawled forward, feeling the sand burn my elbows, my skin raw against the ground. The wall ahead crumbled as a grenade exploded nearby, showering me with dirt and stone. A piece cut across my cheek, warm blood sliding down to mix with the sweat already pouring. Another scar was being written even as I fought. Laughter in the barracks. The barracks were supposed to be a place of rest, but for me, they became another battlefield. By day, we faced enemies with rifles, but by night, I faced enemies armed with laughter. The walls echoed with it, cruel and sharp, bouncing off the bunks like ricochets. Sometimes it came from Davis, sometimes from others, sometimes from voices I could not name in the dark. It always found me, though, even when I buried my face in the thin pillow and tried to let exhaustion drag me under. I learned quickly that war is not only fought in deserts and ruined cities. War is fought in whispers, in sideways glances, in the way men close ranks and leave you standing on the outside. They mocked my scars because they could not erase them. They mocked them because they were reminders of pain they did not understand. And perhaps mocking me made them feel less afraid of their own shadows. The jokes grew bolder as weeks passed. Someone left a small piece of burned cloth on my bunk once, folded neatly like a gift. Another time I overheard two Marines laughing that if I ever got lost in the dark, all they would need to do is follow the glow of my scars. The laughter was not loud enough to alert the sergeants, but always loud enough to reach me. It was designed that way, calculated cruelty, masked as humor. I kept my silence. Some nights I wrote in a small notebook I carried hidden in my pack. Words became my shield when fists would have cost me everything. I wrote about the desert, about the smell of dust, about the way the stars looked brighter when death had walked close that day. I wrote about my scars, how they were rivers of memory carved deep, each one a story, each one a reminder that I had endured. On the page I was honest in a way I could not be in the barracks. There was one Marine, though, who never laughed. His name was Ramirez. He was quiet, older than most of us, with eyes that seemed to carry storms. He never defended me directly, but when Davis began a joke, Ramirez would shift his gaze toward him and the room would still. Sometimes silence is louder than any word. I never thanked him, but I carried his quiet as a form of protection. Despite the cruelty, I refused to shrink. During drills, I volunteered first. During cleaning duty, I worked until the floor shone. During firefights, I held my ground, aiming steady, breathing through fear. Every action was a statement. I am here. I will not be erased. But no matter how much I proved myself, the laughter followed like a shadow. The worst night came after a long patrol. We were exhausted, covered in grime, our bodies trembling from heat and hunger. When we returned to the barracks, someone had drawn on my locker with black marker. The crude sketch showed a body covered in scars, exaggerated lines crisscrossing every inch of skin, with a caption that read, "Marine or monster?" The laughter that night was deafening. I stood there, staring at the drawing. My fists clenching so tightly my nails bit into my palms. My throat burned with words I could not release. If I shouted, they would win. If I cried, they would win. So I breathed, slow and deep, until the rage settled into a quiet resolve. Without saying a word, I opened the locker, placed my rifle inside, and closed it again. The laughter lost some of its edge when I refused to react. But inside, something shifted. That night I lay awake long after the lights went out. The laughter still echoed in my ears, but I began to think beyond it. I thought of the scars themselves, what they meant. They were not marks of shame. They were not signs of weakness. They were survival etched in flesh. They were proof that I had walked through fire and returned, and if the others could not see that, one day someone would. We pushed street by street, every doorway a question, every shadow a threat. The village smelled of smoke and fear. I remember stepping into one house, my rifle raised, and finding nothing but a broken table and the remnants of a child's toy scattered across the floor. War erases innocence first. It leaves only echoes. At some point, I felt the burn along my shoulder where another round had grazed me. The pain was sharp, but it was not enough to stop me. I kept moving, kept firing, each wound joining the map already etched into my body. Around me, men fell, some forever, some screaming for help that could not come fast enough. The desert was drinking their blood, and I swore silently it would not drink mine. Hours later, when the gunfire faded and silence returned, the village was ruins. Smoke curled from shattered walls. Bodies lay in streets where children once played. I sat against a collapsed doorway, my chest rising and falling like it wanted to escape me. My uniform was torn, dark with blood in too many places to count. The medic came again, his hands efficient, stitching, wrapping, covering. He did not flinch at the scars beneath the new wounds. He did not laugh, he only kept me alive, but the others noticed again. When we returned to base, Davis whistled low, his eyes on the fresh bandages across my face and shoulder. "You're turning into a patchwork quilt," he sneered. The others laughed, though softer this time, the memory of the firefight still clinging to them. Even in the shadow of death, they needed to find someone to mock. It was easier than facing their own fear. That night, I washed the blood from my skin in a basin of cold water. As I peeled back the bandages, I looked at the new marks in the dim light. They glistened, raw and angry, but they would heal. And when they did, they would stay. Another layer, another story, another reminder that I had faced what tried to end me, and I was still here. I whispered to myself as I cleaned the wounds. These scars are not weakness. These scars are survival. These scars are proof. And one day, someone will see them for what they are. The next morning, as the sun rose over the camp, I noticed something different. Ramirez gave me a nod, just a slight tilt of his head, as if to say he had seen what I had done in the village. Miller's eyes lingered on me for a moment longer during inspection, a flicker of something like respect passing across his face. They did not say the words aloud, but I felt them. Not everyone saw me as a joke. Not everyone thought the scars were shame. And yet Davis laughed again that evening, louder, bolder, as if determined to drown out any silence that might let the truth breathe. "The burn girl collects scars like medals," he said. The barracks erupted in chuckles, but I caught something new in their tone. Not amusement, but unease, laughter that sounded forced, laughter that hid questions none of them dared to ask. I said nothing, as always. Silence was my weapon, sharper than their words, but deep inside I knew the desert had changed something. My scars were no longer just mine. They had begun to speak louder than Davis ever could, and soon someone else would hear them. The night patrol. Night in the desert is a different kind of battlefield. The heat bleeds away, and the cold cuts sharper than knives. The silence becomes a living thing, heavy and suspicious, every rustle of sand a warning, every flicker of shadow a question. We were ordered to patrol the outskirts of a village that intelligence claimed was safe. Safe is a word that doesn't exist in war. Safe is a lie we tell ourselves so we can step forward into the dark. We moved in single file, boots pressing soft against sand, rifles cradled tight. The moon hung low, a silver eye watching us from above. I could feel the weight of every step. The tension stretched thin between us. Somewhere ahead, a dog barked once and then went quiet. My stomach tightened. Animals know before men do. Ramirez was just ahead of me, his shoulders broad, steady, the kind of presence you could anchor yourself to when the dark tried to swallow you. Davis was behind me, his breath loud, too loud, his muttering about babysitting the burn girl barely concealed. I ignored him, focusing on the rhythm of my breathing, the quiet discipline drilled into me through months of training. The ambush came like lightning, a flash of fire from the ridge above, the scream of bullets tearing the night apart. We dropped to the ground as one, the sand biting into our faces, the air exploding with shouts. My rifle was in my hands before thought caught up. I fired toward the muzzle flashes, each shot a prayer, each recoil a reminder that life was still mine for now. The squad scattered for cover, but in the chaos, Ramirez was hit. I saw him fall, his body jerking before he collapsed into the sand. Without thinking, I crawled toward him, rounds snapping overhead. My arm burned as another bullet grazed past, tearing open the scar that had only just begun to heal. Blood ran hot down my sleeve, but I did not stop. I reached Ramirez, his face pale in the moonlight, his breath ragged. He was bleeding badly from the side, the wound deep and merciless. "Stay with me," I whispered, pressing my hands against the wound. My palms were already slick with my own blood, but I pushed harder, holding life in place with nothing but will. Bullets struck the wall behind us, shards of stone raining down. I did not move. Davis shouted something, but his voice was distant, drowned out by the hammer of my heart. I tore fabric from my sleeve, wrapping it tight around Ramirez, ignoring the sting in my own arm. He groaned, his eyes fluttering. I pressed closer, speaking words I did not know I still carried. "You are not leaving me here. You are not leaving tonight." The firefight raged, but slowly, inch by inch, we fought them back. Miller's orders cut through the chaos, sharp and commanding. The squad rallied, pushing forward, and the ridge fell silent at last. When it was over, the night returned, broken only by the moans of the wounded and the crackle of radios calling for evac. I stayed with Ramirez until the medics came. My uniform was soaked in blood, his and mine, the scars on my arm burning with fresh pain. When they lifted him onto the stretcher, his hand caught mine weakly. His eyes, storm-heavy even now, met mine. He did not speak, but he did not need to. I had read storms before. This one said, "Thank you." Back at the barracks, I cleaned myself in silence. The laughter did not come that night. Davis glanced at me, his smirk absent, his mouth closed. Perhaps he remembered the sight of me crawling through bullets to reach Ramirez. Perhaps he had no words sharp enough to cut through the truth of what he had seen. For once, the silence belonged to me. I lay on my cot, staring at the ceiling, the pain in my arm throbbing with every heartbeat. Another scar had been written into me, another story carved in blood and survival. I traced it in the dark, feeling the sting, but also the weight of what it meant. This one was not just mine. This one carried Ramirez in it. This one carried the moment when survival became more than just my own. The laughter in the barracks would return. I knew it. Cruelty doesn't vanish overnight, but something had changed. They had seen me bleed and refuse to fall. They had seen me hold life inside another Marine with nothing but my bare hands. They had seen scars open, and still I fought. And even if they mocked again, deep inside, they would remember that night patrol. They would remember that sometimes scars mean strength. I drifted to sleep with the sound of wind moving across the desert, whispering like a ghost through the cracks of the walls. And in that whisper I heard a promise. These scars will speak louder than any laughter. And one day they will silence even the highest voice in the chain of command. The general's visit. Rumors in war travel faster than bullets. One morning, before the sun had even stretched itself across the desert sky, whispers began to ripple through camp. The general was coming. No one said which one at first, only that a man with stars on his shoulders would walk among us by the end of the week. The announcement struck the barracks like electricity. Marines, who spent months covered in sweat and dust, suddenly cared about spotless boots and polished rifles. Uniforms were scrubbed until fabric thinned, bunks tightened with precision, and every corner of the camp became a stage for discipline. Even Davis stopped his muttering for a time, too consumed by the idea that the general might look his way and decide his future with a single glance. For me, the rumor was both distant and heavy. Generals lived in stories we told ourselves during long nights, their names like myths carried across radio waves. I did not expect him to see me. Why would he? I was only one Marine among many, a shadow at the edge of their laughter. Yet something inside me stirred. A quiet voice reminding me of the scars that covered my skin, scars that no polish or shine could hide. The days leading up to his visit stretched long. Training became sharper, every mistake punished harder, as if discipline itself could be stacked like sandbags to impress a man who had seen every war before ours. I pushed myself harder. Not for him, not for the eyes that would sweep across the camp, but because I had learned that proving myself was the only shield against the whispers. The night before his arrival, I lay awake listening to the breathing of the barracks. Some men whispered prayers, others joked nervously, laughter softer than usual. I traced the newest scar on my shoulder, where the night patrol had reopened old wounds. The skin was raised, rough under my fingertips, a story carved too deep to ever fade. I wondered if the general would notice. I wondered if he would see weakness or something else. Morning came sharp with the sound of boots striking gravel, the camp alive with a tension that thrummed in every chest. We stood in formation, rifles at our sides, uniforms pressed, eyes forward. The sun was relentless, beating down on us as though determined to expose every flaw. Then he arrived. The general stepped from the transport with a presence that silenced even the desert wind. He was older than I expected. His hair streaked with gray, his face carved by lines that came only from decades of command. His uniform was crisp, medals gleaming across his chest, but it was his eyes that caught me. They were sharp, searching, the kind of eyes that weighed more than they revealed. He walked slowly down the line, boots crunching against sand, his gaze moving over each Marine. When he passed Davis, I saw the man straighten so tall his spine seemed ready to snap. When he passed Ramirez, still pale but standing, the general's eyes softened for the briefest moment, and then his gaze reached me. I did not look away. Training told us to keep our eyes front, but something held me. His gaze dropped just slightly to the scars along my arms where my sleeves ended. They were pale rivers against sun-darkened skin, twisting across muscle like history carved in flesh. For a heartbeat, he froze. His eyes widened, just enough for me to see. His breath caught, so subtle only someone watching closely would notice. The world seemed to pause. The laughter, the whispers, the months of mockery in the barracks all collapsed into that single silence. The general was not laughing, he was not smirking, he was remembering. I saw it in his face, in the flicker of recognition that passed through his eyes. He moved on quickly, but the silence he left behind clung heavier than the desert air. Davis glanced at me, confusion flickering across his features. Ramirez tilted his head slightly, as though confirming what he had always suspected. And me. I stood as still as stone, my heart pounding, my scars burning with a strange fire. The general finished his inspection and gave his speech. Words about discipline, about honor, about carrying the weight of the corps with pride. His voice carried strength, But my mind was caught on that moment when his eyes froze on me. The way his face shifted, the way the air itself seemed to hold its breath. Later, when the formation dissolved and men crowded around with nervous laughter, I slipped away. I needed silence. I needed to understand what had just happened. For months, my scars had been a target. For months, they had been mocked, ridiculed, reduced to jokes in the dark. And yet one man, the highest in the chain, had looked at them and stopped. I replayed the moment again and again. Did he see weakness? Did he see shame? No, I knew that look. It was not disgust, it was not pity, it was memory. He had seen scars like mine before. Perhaps on himself, perhaps on someone he had lost, perhaps on a battlefield long ago where laughter had no place. That night, the barracks were restless. Some men speculated about promotions, others argued about who the general had looked at longest. No one mentioned the pause when his eyes touched my scars, but I felt the weight of it in the silence between their words. Davis watched me longer than usual, his smirk absent, his jaw tight. The mockery that once flowed so easily seemed caught in his throat. I lay awake, my notebook open, the pen trembling in my hand. I wrote what I had seen, every detail of his expression, every flicker of his eyes. For the first time, I wrote not only for myself, but for the possibility that my scars carried meaning beyond my own survival. The general had frozen, and in that moment, the tide had shifted. The desert was still the same, the war still brutal, the barracks still heavy with unspoken battles, but something had changed. My scars no longer belonged only to me. They had been seen, truly seen, by someone who understood their language. And though he had said nothing, the silence he left behind spoke louder than any words. I closed my notebook and pressed my palm against the raised lines on my arm. They burned under my touch, alive in a way they had never been before, and I whispered to myself, so soft that only the night could hear, one day, these scars will silence them all. Unmasking scars. The general's visit should have ended like every other inspection, with us fading back into routine and him disappearing into a world of maps and orders far above our reach. But his eyes had lingered, and in that pause he had left behind a silence that refused to vanish. I carried it with me into drills, into the mess hall, even into the darkness of the barracks where laughter usually thrived. It was there, clinging like smoke, a reminder that scars had power beyond the ridicule of men too young to know their meaning. 2 days after the inspection, I was called to the command tent. My name echoed across camp, and for a moment I thought I had misheard. Marines glanced at me, some smirking, some confused, Davis narrowing his eyes as though certain I was about to be punished. My boots felt heavier with every step toward the tent, my breath shallow against the weight of expectation. Inside, the air was cooler, heavy with the scent of maps and ink. Officers stood rigid around a table, their voices clipped. And then he was there, the general, his posture straight, his eyes sharp as glass. When his gaze lifted to me, that silence returned. He dismissed the others with a nod, and suddenly I stood alone before him. "Sit," he said, his voice low but firm. I obeyed, my back stiff, my heart hammering. His eyes moved across me again, not with the cold assessment of a superior officer, but with something heavier, something personal. He studied the scars on my arms, the fresh line along my cheek, the marks I could not hide, even beneath the uniform. "Where did you get them?" he asked. Though it was not a question, it was a command wrapped in curiosity, as if he needed to hear the story aloud, though he already knew parts of it. I swallowed. My mouth was dry. An accident before I enlisted. Fire. And the rest, here, on the field. His jaw tightened. He leaned closer, his voice almost a whisper. "Do you know why I froze when I saw you in formation?" I shook my head. "Because I have seen those scars before, not yours, mine." He pulled back the sleeve of his immaculate uniform, and there they were, pale ridges, old and faded, etched into his skin like rivers dried long ago. They wrapped around his forearm, his hand trembling slightly as he exposed them. A convoy hit by an IED years ago, fire everywhere. I carried these back, same as you. For a moment I could not breathe. The general, the man who stood above us all, carried the same language carved into his flesh. He knew what it meant to walk through fire and return marked forever. He knew the weight of laughter, the sting of silence, the way scars whisper to you in the dark when no one else listens. "You carry them well," he said finally, letting the sleeve fall. "But you should never carry them in shame. Those men who mock you, they mock what they cannot understand. One day they will learn, and you must be ready for that day." He dismissed me, but as I stepped back into the heat of the camp, something inside me shifted. The laughter I had endured for months no longer rang the same. I had seen the general's scars. I had heard his words. My scars were not chains. They were bonds, tying me to survival, tying me even to the man whose stars shone above us all. That evening, as the barracks filled with idle chatter, I felt Davis's eyes on me. He opened his mouth, ready with another remark, but when I met his gaze, I did not flinch. For the first time, I let the silence speak, the silence heavy with truth I now carried. His words died on his tongue. The others noticed. Ramirez gave me the smallest of nods. Miller's eyes flicked toward me, sharp with quiet recognition. None of them knew what had passed in the command tent, but they could sense it. Something had changed. I lay awake that night, tracing the scars on my arm with steady fingers. They no longer felt like reminders of isolation. They felt like proof that survival runs deep, proof that fire had touched me, but not consumed me, proof that even generals carried the same marks. For months, I had endured the laughter, the whispers, the cruel drawings, and the endless nicknames. For months, I had been the shadow in their ranks. But now I knew the truth. Scars unmask us. They strip away the illusion of perfection and leave only what is real. And in their reality, they hold more power than any joke. When morning came, the desert stretched before us unchanged, but I walked into it different. The scars on my skin glistened in the rising light, no longer something I tried to hide, and when Davis smirked faintly as we marched, I saw the flicker of unease in his eyes. My silence no longer came from fear. It came from knowing the scars would one day silence him completely, and that day was coming closer. The silent truth. The days after the meeting with the general moved differently. The desert still burned, the night still froze, the war still demanded its price, but a new current ran beneath it all. I had carried my scars alone for so long, believing they were mine to defend, mine to endure, mine to explain in silence. Now I knew they spoke a language others had once lived too, even those whose voices echoed across the highest ranks. The general did not leave immediately. His presence lingered in camp longer than expected. He inspected units, spoke with officers, and moved among us with eyes that seemed to weigh more than uniforms or rifles. I tried to stay unnoticed, but fate has its way of pulling truths into the open. 3 nights after his inspection, as the desert wind scraped softly against canvas walls, I was summoned again. The command tent was quieter this time, lit only by a single lamp that cast shadows long and sharp. The general stood alone at the map table, his hands clasped behind his back. He did not look at me when I entered. "Close the flap," he said. His voice was low, steady, but there was a heaviness in it I had not heard before. I obeyed, and for a long moment, silence filled the space. Then he spoke. "You wonder why I froze when I saw you. You think it was recognition. You are right, but not in the way you believe." He turned, his eyes catching the lamplight, old battles burning in them. "When I saw your scars, I did not only remember mine, I remembered the men I lost that day, I remembered the convoy burning, the screams trapped in metal, the smell of skin and fuel as fire swallowed the desert. I remembered the ones I could not save. His words were steady, but his eyes betrayed him. They glistened not with weakness, but with the weight of memory too long carried alone. He pulled back his sleeve again, showing the faded ridges that wrapped his arm. His hand trembled as he touched them. These are not only proof that I lived, they are proof that others died. I felt the air shift between us. My scars had been mocked as weakness, reduced to jokes and whispers, but here, in this moment, they became bridges. His scars and mine spoke across the silence, telling stories no laughter could erase. I froze, he continued, because when I saw you, I saw the war staring back. You carry it on your skin the way I do. You carry it without hiding, without shame. I hid mine for years, beneath uniforms, beneath medals, beneath silence. But the truth is, the war never leaves. It lives in us. It marks us. It speaks even when we try to silence it. I did not move, did not speak. My throat was tight, my heart a steady drum. He stepped closer, his eyes sharp, but softening with something rare. Do not let them reduce you to their laughter. Do not let them make you believe scars are less than medals. They are the truest kind of honor, the proof you faced death and refused to surrender. The men who mock you will learn, and when they do, they will fall silent. I felt heat rise in my chest, not of shame, but of recognition. For months, my scars had been weapons against me. Now, they were armor. The general straightened, his voice shifting back to command. You will return to your unit. You will continue as before. But remember this. Scars are the stories the body tells when words are not enough. Carry them with the weight they deserve. And never again believe they make you less. He dismissed me with a nod, but as I stepped back into the night, the desert sky seemed wider, the stars brighter. I breathed the cold air deep into my lungs, each breath carrying the truth heavier than my rifle. Back in the barracks, laughter tried to rise again. Davis muttered, his words sharp, testing, but when I turned my gaze on him, I did not flinch. He faltered, his voice breaking into silence. The others noticed. Ramirez gave me the faintest smile. Miller's jaw tightened with approval. For the first time, the balance had shifted. That night I lay awake, tracing the scars across my skin. They no longer felt like reminders of fire or battle. They felt like testimony, like silent truths carved deeper than flesh. They were not the enemy. They were the language of survival. The general had carried his scars in silence for decades. I carried mine in ridicule. But now we were the same. Marked, yes. Damaged, perhaps. But broken, never. And though the desert still demanded blood, though the laughter might return in softer tones, I knew it could never reach me the same way again. The truth was louder. The truth was stronger. The truth lived in every scar, and one day soon, that truth would silence them all. Respect in the Corps is not given freely. It is earned in silence, in the way you carry your rifle when your hands shake, in the way you stand when your body aches, in the way you step forward when every instinct tells you to stay back. I never asked for their respect. I only asked to be allowed to fight alongside them, to prove with action what their laughter tried to erase. But respect has a way of arriving when you least expect it, often through the very battles that carve you open. It began subtly. After the general's visit, after the night when his scars met mine, something shifted in the barracks. The laughter did not vanish completely, but it faltered, stuttered, lost its rhythm. Davis tried once, his voice sharp in the dark, but no one answered him. The silence that followed was louder than his words. He scowled, muttered under his breath, but the room no longer belonged to him. On patrol, Ramirez stayed closer. He didn't speak of it, but his presence was steady, an unspoken shield. Miller's voice carried a new edge when he gave me orders, not softer, not pitying, but sharpened with trust. He knew I would not falter. He knew I would carry the weight. The turning point came during another mission, a sweep through a stretch of desert littered with abandoned buildings. The sun was cruel that day, the heat pressing so heavy it felt like it wanted to crush us into the sand. We moved cautiously, rifles raised, every shadow a question, and then the ground erupted beneath us, an IED buried deep, waiting, triggered as the lead vehicle rolled past. The blast threw bodies into the air, shrapnel screaming across the sand. I hit the ground hard, my ears ringing, dust swallowing the world. When I pushed myself up, blood smeared my face, my vision blurred. But I could still hear the cries. Marines calling for help, voices cracked with pain. Training took over. I crawled through smoke and fire, dragging one man back by his vest, then another, ignoring the heat that seared my palms, ignoring the sharp bite of shrapnel slicing across my thigh. Pain was an old companion. Pain did not stop me. By the time medics arrived, I was covered in blood that wasn't only mine. My scars had reopened, crimson lines crossing pale ones, old wounds meeting new. I sat in the dirt, trembling, exhausted, but alive. Around me, Marines stared, not with laughter, not with smirks, with silence, with something I had not seen in their eyes before. Respect is quiet when it arrives. It does not announce itself. It lingers in the way men step aside to let you pass, in the way they meet your gaze without mocking, in the way their voices soften when they speak your name. In the days that followed, I felt it grow. No one drew on my locker again. No one left burned cloth on my bunk. The cruel nicknames faded, replaced not with kindness but with something better, acknowledgement. Even Davis changed. He did not apologize. Men like him rarely do, but his eyes no longer held the same cruelty. He looked at me now with caution, as if the scars he once mocked had turned into something sharper than words, something he could not fight against. His silence was apology enough. At night, the barracks were different. The laughter still came, but it no longer carried knives. It was nervous, human, the kind that masks fear rather than feeds cruelty. And sometimes, when silence stretched too long, Ramirez would glance at me, his storm-heavy eyes soft, as though to remind me that even in war, even in scars, companionship exists. One evening, Miller called me aside. His face was hard, as always, but his voice carried weight. "They respect you now," he said. "Not because of what you said, because of what you did. You bled with them. You pulled them out when others froze. That earns respect in this place more than anything else ever could." I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. Respect earned in blood is heavier than medals. It cannot be polished or paraded. It is carved into the silence between men who know death too well. I still traced my scars at night, the ridges raised beneath my fingers, maps of fire and battle. But they no longer felt like reminders of isolation. They felt like bridges. They connected me to Ramirez, to Miller, even to the general who carried his own. They connected me to the ones I had dragged from the fire, their breath steady because mine had refused to stop. Respect earned is fragile, but it grows. The barracks that once echoed with laughter now carried something quieter, something stronger. And though the desert would still demand its price, though more scars would come, I no longer carried them alone. The general had seen me, my scars had spoken to him, and now they spoke to the men beside me. The silence that followed was no longer the silence of ridicule, it was the silence of respect. And in that silence, I found something I had thought impossible, belonging. The weight of scars. Scars do not fade in war, they multiply. Some mark the skin, some bury themselves in the mind, some sit heavy in the chest long after the battlefield has gone quiet. By the time our deployment neared its end, I carried more than I could count. My arms, my shoulder, my cheek, each line a story carved without permission. My body was a canvas the war insisted on painting, And yet, as I traced them in the rare moments of silence, I realized they no longer whispered shame. They sang survival. The barracks had grown quieter over the months. The cruel laughter that once chased me through every night had dulled, replaced by the heavy silence of men who now knew I would never break. Ramirez still carried storms in his eyes, but he sat near me more often, his presence calm, his words few but steady. Miller treated me with the kind of discipline reserved for equals, no longer watching for failure, but expecting endurance. Even Davis, the sharpest tongue in the unit, had fallen silent. His smirks were gone, his eyes heavy when they met mine. One night, as we prepared for another patrol, he stopped beside me. His voice was low, almost reluctant. "You kept Ramirez alive that night," he said. He did not wait for my answer, did not ask for forgiveness, but the words lingered in the air. For Davis, it was as close to apology as war would allow. The desert gave us no peace. The final months were filled with ambushes, raids, checkpoints where shadows moved faster than orders. I bled again, more scars written, more proof etched into the story of my body. But every time the knife of battle cut, I rose. Every time fire tried to claim me, I walked out breathing. The Marines no longer mocked when bandages covered my skin. They looked at me with something else, the recognition of someone who had stood in the fire and refused to vanish. Then came the day of departure. The camp bustled with movement. Gear packed, vehicles lined like soldiers themselves. The general returned to see us off. He walked through the ranks slowly, his eyes still carrying the weight of decades. When he passed me, his gaze touched the scars on my face and arms again. He did not freeze this time. He nodded, small but certain, as if to say he no longer carried that truth alone. That night, under the stars of a desert I would never forget, I sat with my notebook open. The pages were filled with fragments, memories, whispers, blood and silence, laughter that cut and laughter that died. The echo of the general's words, the storm of Ramirez's eyes, the weight of Miller's trust. I wrote of scars, not as wounds, but as witnesses. They had seen everything. They had carried me when words failed. They had silenced the cruel and spoken louder than any rank. I thought of the girl I had been when I first walked into boot camp, sleeves rolled, scars exposed, laughter chasing me from every corner. I thought of the woman who now sat beneath the stars, scars multiplied, but no longer mocked. Respect had been earned, not given. Belonging had been carved in blood, and survival had become a language others finally understood. War does not end when the rifles fall silent. It follows you home, it whispers in the dark, it traces your body when you wake in the night, reminding you of the fire that once tried to claim you. But I no longer feared those whispers. I welcomed them. Because every line across my skin told the same story. I faced death, and I am still here. The Marines mocked my scars until the general saw them and froze. And in that moment, everything changed. My scars were no longer chains. They were proof. They were honor. They were the weight I carried, but also the strength that carried me. And if anyone asked me now what they mean, I would tell them this: scars are the truth war leaves behind. They are the medals no one pins to your chest, the memories no one can take away, the evidence that survival is louder than laughter. When the transport lifted us away from the desert, the horizon fading into distance, I pressed my hand against my arm, feeling the raised ridges beneath the fabric. They pulsed with memory, but also with something else. Pride. The war would never leave me, but neither would the strength. And in that balance, I finally found peace. If this story spoke to you, if it made you reflect on the scars you carry, visible or hidden, share your thoughts in the comments. Every scar has a story, and I will read each one you decide to tell. And if you want more stories like this, full of truth, memory, and strength, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Your voice matters here, Let's keep these stories alive together.